Dear friends, in this conference, I will look at the internal structure of the book of Revelation. For to understand a book, it's important to understand its structure. If you don't, you run the risk of not seeing the thread. In the case of the Apocalypse, it's a particularly difficult task, unfortunately, since biblical scholars have not yet reached a consensus on this point. If you look at exegetical commentaries, you will often notice the great variety of structures proposed for the Apocalypse. Some scholars even go so far as to give no plan at all. However, a few points can be clarified. In particular, some structural elements of the book can be discerned. First of all, Revelation has 4 explicit and easy to notice septets. Septet means a group of 7 homogeneous elements. We have the septet of letters, the septet of seals, the septet of trumpets, and the septet of bowls. Secondly, the expression "I was in the Spirit" appears 4 times in John's mouth at important points in the book. On the island of Patmos, just before the inaugural vision, in heaven, just before the vision of heaven, in the desert, just before the vision of the great war, Babylon, and on the mountain, just before the vision of the heavenly Jerusalem. Now, perhaps the most crucial point for the question of the internal structure of Revelation is this. Is there a linear progression of events in Revelation so that what is mentioned after first event necessarily comes after that one? If that is the case, then, for example, the events of chapter 13 would follow those of chapters 11 and 12. Or, according to a different hypothesis, are there rather recapitulations in the Apocalypse, so that an event could be presented several times from different points of view? For example, do the 7 bowls, chapter 16, represent plagues different from and occurring after the 7 trumpets in chapter 8 and 9? Or are they basically the same events told from a different point of view? Careful examination would seem to indicate that the Apocalypse uses the literary device of recapitulation, as Victorinus of Pitot, first commentator of the Apocalypse in the 3rd century, had already understood. I quote him. We must not pay attention to the order of what is recounted, because often the Holy Spirit, after having led his discourse to the end of the last days, returns again to the same period and completes what he had said more briefly. And so in Revelation, we must not look for an order, but for understanding, intellectus. So we need to follow the prophetic text very carefully and understand that the Holy Spirit proceeds in small steps in what he says. He upsets the order of events, going through them up to the end of times, and then repeating the times that have gone before. He shows an event that will happen only once as having happened several times. Unless we understand that the plural announcement of the event does not mean several times, we fall into great obscurity. St. Augustine also believes that there are recapitulations in the Apocalypse. I quote him. In this book, the Apocalypse, many things are said in an obscure way in order to exercise the mind of the readers, and there are few things whose obvious clarity makes it possible, like tracks on a trail, to discover the rest, and not without difficulty. Especially as it repeats the same things in so many ways that it seems to say different things, whereas we discover that he speaks of the same thing sometimes in one way and sometimes in another. I think Victorinus and Augustine are right. If you don't understand the presence in Revelation of the literary device of recapitulation, you come up with inextricable difficulties. For example, the sounding of the trumpet of the seventh trumpet at the end of chapter 11 should mark the end of history, according to what is said in 10:7. But it seems to be bound from chapter 12 onwards. Another example, the enemies of Christ are put to death at the end of chapter 19, but then where do the nations come from that are still waging war against the Christian in Revelation 20? On the other hand, understanding the literary device of recapitulation sheds light on several passages in Revelation. The clearest case is that of chapters 11, the two witnesses, and 13, the two beasts, which both mention the symbolic duration of 42 months, a time of persecution, as we have seen, and deal with the same event, the confrontation between the beast from the sea and the disciples of Christ. In chapter 11, this confrontation is described from the point of view of the militant church, symbolized by the two witnesses, bearing witness to Christ in the great city, Babylon. The beast from the sea being briefly mentioned in 11:7. In chapter 13, the confrontation is described from the point of view of the beast, with a long description of it and its auxiliary, the beast from the earth, where the Christians are briefly mentioned in 13:7 and 15. We will see later that the septet of bowls is probably a recapitulation of the septet of trumpets. I see you soon for the next conference.